Good morning. I am Leslie Tarkington, and we have Budget Committee members Leslie Moriarty, Jeffrey Raymer, and Andreas Deuce present. Welcome to the special meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation Budget Committee to continue discussion of the budget guidelines. I welcome Andy Deuce to his first meeting.
What would that do? Would it change the look?
I welcome, Jenny, can you please shut off or shut down the voice? I welcome Andy Deuce to his first meeting as a member of the Budget Committee. Andy is a second-term BET member and chairs the Investment Advisory Committee and the Debt and Fund Balance Policy Special Committee. Thank you to Deborah Hess, who has stepped back. She was a strong contributing member to the fiscal year 22 guidelines. I'm appreciative of her teamwork on the Budget Committee in this term to date, including the successful fiscal year 21 budget cycle last February and March. I am grateful to Leslie Moriarty and Jeff Raymer, who since our last meeting provided the committee with constructive input to proceed with our discussion for the guidelines today. Roland, would you please now bring up the screen and present the estimate budget exhibit 1 to the budget guidelines? And again, it's the posted October 23rd, Friday's version, and walk us through the key indicators.
Mrs. Tarkington?
Yes.
Just to follow Robert's rules, before Mr. Minarski runs through the content of it, I would like to move the item to put it on the table before we start to discuss it. And I would be glad to move it for the purpose of getting it before us.
I second that motion.
So thank you, Mr. Raymer, and thank you, Mr. Deuce. Thank you for keeping us parliamentary procedures correct, Mr. Raymer. So thank you. Roland, would you please just run through what we have here? No, I think we want the October 23rd version, the one that was posted for this meeting, Roland. Do you have that version from Friday that you circulated to the BET members and that Ms. Larkin posted, I believe, Saturday morning?
Mm-hmm. It's the version you circulated, Roland, at about 2:55 on Friday. That looks like it.
This is the one that was sent out on Friday.
Yes, thank you, Roland.
This one, the most significant thing here from the previous one is a reduction in the pension contribution, which we had at 30,600,000 or 30,500,000. This came down to 28.6. And it also increased the capital.
Start at the top and just go through the you summarize this estimate budget. That was like may not be familiar with what had happened previous to the Friday posting.
The operating budgets were increased by 2% for most items. And except for the salaries are coming over for the non-certified staff as pretty well flat with a slight increase for steps and things like that. The teacher salaries are in at 3%. And the teacher, the 200s have an increase of, I believe that was 1.9% for special ed. and everything else is at 2%. This reflects an allocation of the benefits to the town and to the Board of Education. Healthcare is still going up 10% in this version. Other fixed is going up 2% plus an increase for insurance costs. And the capital tax levy, the capital projects are increased up to $55 million. And the tax levy itself stays flat at 51. In the use of fund balance, we're using 15 as before, and $1.5 million to cover prior year losses for Nathaniel Witherall and school lunch. And in this version, we're also using $3 million from capital, non-recurring for capital projects. The other revenues have been increased at $2.6 million to reflect the receipt of certain government grants from the state. We don't know which ones yet, but we've always received something. So this increase reflects the anticipation that we will receive something from the state, which comes down to a mill rate of 11.792, which is 1.74% higher than last year.
Any other comments on that, Roland?
No, not really.
So I would like to make one comment in case anyone's looking at this, that the use of capital non-recurring fund balance was moved from the capital tax levy in that section down below to funding at request. And you know, it didn't change. It's just a change in location. And again, it needs to be used for capital. So I just wanted to clarify that in case there was any question about that point. Let me just add a couple of things. The format of the budget guidelines and text this year follows that of this budget estimate. In addition, Roland mentioned the benefits that have been allocated. This is at the town level and at the BOE schools level, not down to the departments level, to have everyone understand to the extent that these additional costs are increasing more rapidly than obviously inflation or even salaries. And this is to basically put that forth. I think there are 2 new exhibits related to benefit cost allocations between the town and BOE schools and the benefits summary by bargaining units. So those would be exhibits 2 and exhibits 4 to the budget guidelines. And as Roland has just said, the posted fiscal year 22 budget guidelines, when we look at the department operating costs, the fiscal year budget guidelines increases 1.5 million for the town and $5.5 million for schools, a total of 7.0 million. Fixed costs are increasing by $4.8 million. So the total amount to be financed, whatever. So I just wanted to sort of clarify those points. So do we have any comments, discussion at this point? Any amendments or?
I would welcome the opportunity to comment at the appropriate time.
So, Mr. Raymer, would you like the budget estimate to be up on the screen, or do you not need that for your comments?
I don't think I need that for my comments. I don't mind it being up on the screen if others would like to keep it there.
So Roland, what can you take down the screen for now? And thank you.
And before Jeff starts, let me just ask a procedural question. I believe there have been some changes to the proposed guidelines since the draft that was posted on Friday. Process-wise, how do you intend on introducing those at that meeting? There'll be motions to amend or to accept the changes, but at what point are we discussing those?
I believe that my parliamentary advisor indicated that we would now have to move that forward as an amendment, which is one of the reasons I asked if there were any amendments at this point in time, but I didn't hear any amendments.
So maybe it would be best if we move the change to substitute the new exhibits 1 through 5. I'm not sure all of them were changed, but but they were sent out as a group, so maybe we should keep them as a group, so that we're all talking about the document that's going to be brought to a final vote, presumably at our meeting today. Why don't I move the substitution of the exhibits 1 through 5 that were disseminated to the budget committee members yesterday by Roland. I think he sent out an email to us at about 4:45 yesterday afternoon, and I would move that the document before us be amended to substitute those 5 exhibits.
I'll second that. I would like to go through what those changes are.
So, Mr. Raymer, would it be appropriate then if Mr. Geiger put those up on the screen and went through the changes and then returned to you for the comments?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think it'd be very appropriate to take discussion on the proposed amendment, which is what I think Mrs. Moriarty is asking to do. And that would be very appropriate at this time. The matter that matters before us has been moved and seconded. You have discussion on that first, and then you vote on the amendment, and then you can have discussion of the amended document before you vote on that.
So more specifically, I was really asking you if you would mind if Roland put up the screen so he could show the exhibit. I think you mean primarily exhibit 1, and then we'll come back to you after Roland has gone through this.
Yep,
Roland, can you now put up the document that has today's date on it? It's similar to what Mr. Raymer was saying, except that it's dated the 27th. And Roland, would you please walk through the changes that were made? You might start with the change in the pension contribution.
Just one quick point of order. I didn't mean to create a difficulty, but I had moved the version that was sent out by Roland at 4:45 yesterday. That version was dated October 26th. Maybe I'd be glad to amend my motion to be moving the version that's now before us, the one dated October 27th. Maybe somebody could enlighten me as to what changed from yesterday's version to today's version.
Well, I would be happy to explain that change to you, and then we'll let Roland proceed.
Sure.
The date was changed to October 27th. A footnote 2 was removed. And at Ms. Moriarty's request, also, I mean, we've been all working on this together. There were a couple of descriptive words to say budget added to the titles or what of the additional exhibits 2, 3, and 4. Roland, is that correct?
Yes.
So if the seconder would accept the change, I would amend my motion I would revise my motion to be moving the version that's now on the screen, the one dated October 27th.
I'd also, let me ask you this question. I'm the seconder, that's fine with me, but we, at some point, will then also need to move the revised text, which matches this the numbers in this revised chart. So do you want to move the entire revised guidelines at this point, Jeff?
I would gladly do that with the expectation that you'll take a moment, Ms. Moriarty, to go through what those changes were.
Yes.
So, again, if this is appropriate this time, why don't we just have Roland comment through to the changes here that resulted from this one change that we had basically agreed to on Friday. We kept, we were waiting for the final number to come in on the pension contribution, but also wanted to get the budget guidelines posted and you know, on Friday, so that everyone would have them for the weekend to review. That number came in at within 3 minutes of the time for posting. So we had already completed the package and posted it. So this was something that had been agreed to in advance, but then we had to walk through the various and sundry changes. So Roland, why don't you please walk through the changes that resulted on this document?
We received
Exhibit 1.
We received information that the pension contribution could be decreased by $300,000 from $28,600,000 to $28,300,000. That resulted in a reallocation of the benefits to the town and to the Board of Education, a reduction of about $255,000. And it resulted in a reduction of the mill rate from 1.74% increase to 1.67. That's really the only change that took place on this document.
Thank you, Roland.
Roland,
yeah.
can you just scroll down a little further? The footnote 2 was to be removed. All right, so you need to remove the indicator of that
Right.
up above.
At the benefits line.
Right. And just, this is an obvious thing, but once the pension contribution was modified, it impacts the calculation of the allocation of benefit costs to department. So it impacted the benefits line and the percentage increases by departments, as well as exhibits 2. I don't believe it impacted exhibit 3.
Mr. Raymer, do you want to continue with your comments? I'm sorry, it seemed to help us to clarify by putting this screen up. So if you would like to continue with your comment.
Yeah, so the amendment now is before us. It's been moved and seconded. There's been discussion. I guess there's no further discussion on this amendment. So it would be right for a vote. I had thought Mrs. Moriarty was going to, since the motion was amended to include the text of the guidelines discussion as well, I thought Mrs. Moriarty or somebody was going to go through what the changes in the text were as well before we vote.
Well, we can do that. Roland, do you want to go through with the highlighted version, what those changes were? On the, maybe you could put up the highlighted version that was sent to you prior to your sending back and that way everyone, whichever way you prefer.
So there's the highlighted version.
And these are before the changes that have been made to the version that you sent out on Friday.
Yes, these are changes from Friday, yes.
Yeah, and the changes, I believe before us now is an amendment to make changes in the numbers that we see highlighted. Am I not mistaken? Am I mistaken?
These are the final changes, the highlighted numbers. That's what it is right now.
Oh, so those are the figures. Let me just take a look here. Oh, yes, I see. Okay, thank you.
Roland, you might just scroll through it and, you know, if we want to, they're all highlighted, and we can see that the mill rate increase of 1.67%, et cetera. They're modest changes, but they reflect the actual pension fund contribution as presented by the actuary whose report was received just prior to posting at 3 p.m. on Friday.
Leslie, if I can interrupt, can you promote my other call in? I'm going to lose my video here in a few minutes.
Oh, certainly.
I'm an attendee on a call in on a cell phone as well. Sorry.
So, have you done that? I
Yes.
don't see oh, I see. Yes, I do see.
Just unmute me. That's all. Thanks.
Are you unmuted? It doesn't. Have you unmuted your phone? Or are you worried to have the double one?
I'm unmuted, yes.
I'm sorry, can you hear? Can you talk?
Andy?
Okay.
Andy, you're going to be proceeding with us just by phone now? Is that what's happening?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. I have all the documents with me.
Roland, are there any other highlighted changes?
Not that I'm aware of. This is what I got this morning with these changes on it.
Okay.
Right, so just to confirm, the numbers were modified to reflect the new Exhibit 1 numbers with the revised pension calculation. Can I ask one question, Roland, on the new Exhibit 2? Fiscal, on Exhibit 2, fiscal 20 indicates it's a budget, and I believe it's not quite actual either. Can you explain what we see?
I moved it to cell phone.
Fiscal 20 numbers
Let
on.
me bring that up.
Right.
The 1920 is really, I guess you could say it's as close to an actual as we could get. And then the other ones were kind of extrapolations off of that 1920 to come up with the 2021 projected budget or estimated budget.
Okay, so I'd like to make the change on the October 27th draft that we have moved and we'll be voting on shortly. Roland had modified it to say budget for all three of those categories. It's probably more accurate to show it as fiscal 20 saying actual and fiscal 21 and 22. Fiscal 21 is budget, fiscal 22 I guess is estimate, but I'm okay with leaving it as, no, maybe we should say estimate at this point. So if we can make that change.
Okay.
No.
So we'll call the first one actual and the other two estimates.
No, the second one is budget, isn't it?
Fiscal 22.
Budget?
It's an extrapolation off of the 1920 actuals.
Okay, so it's not what we budgeted originally. It too is an estimate. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
So just to ask that question the same way, make sure I understand that fiscal 21 column does not tie back to the approved budget. Those are revised numbers, what you know now.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, it should say estimate. Jeff, for parliamentary reasons, do we need to make a specific motion to that, or?
No, I think we just had detailed what's before us that in discussion. Now that we understand what the amendment consists of, if there's no further discussion, we could vote on the amendment.
Okay.
If there's no further discussion on the amendment.
No more discussion here.
So Leslie, just if we vote then on the amendment, it just refers the rest of our conversation. We will be addressing comments to this revised draft dated October 27th. The changes are primarily just the reflection of the revised pension number and how that flows through the charts and the document. So I'm ready to vote on that. Did we lose Leslie?
Leslie
No.
Tark, you on
She's
the line?
muted. Okay. She was.
Yeah, I'm here. Something blipped on mine, and so I had to, halfway come in again, but I've been here. So thank you, Leslie, for elaborating on that point, and then also clarifying. I think this was a last minute change late last night, so thank you for that change. So those in favor of this amendment, would you please vote and say your name, please?
Leslie Moore.
Andy Dew says, sorry.
Okay.
Jeff Raymer, aye.
Andy Deuce, yes.
Leslie, did I hear from you?
Yes.
Leslie?
I said yes.
Leslie Moriarty, yes. Leslie Tarkington, yes. Okay, so now discussion on the budget as amended. Jeff, I believe you had started comments and then we determined that we should make this motion, which is now approved.
Thank you, Mrs. Tarkington. So with my apologies.
Mr. Raymer, may I
Yes.
just ask one question?
Sure.
Do you want this screen up or would you like Roland to pull it down for the moment?
I don't think I need Exhibit 2. If there's others who would like to see Exhibit 1, that's fine with me, but I don't think I need the screen for my remarks. Actually, you know what? I did shave this morning, but maybe it would be just as well that that we have Exhibit 1 because my references, some of them will be to items that appear on Exhibit 1, so maybe that would be good. 95. Okie doke. So I mean, I think first I need to say that, you know, when you serve on a board like this, I think one makes an effort to try and reach out and find common ground. In this particular case, on these guidelines, there was certainly very intensive dialogue. At some points, I think the dialogue was strident. If I've been strident in some of the dialogue, I apologize, but I'm glad to be coming together on something that we can at least put before us for discussion purposes. I've sat on boards with Mrs. Tarkington for more than a decade. We work well together. We seldom agree 100%, but we work well together. And I appreciate her supervision as chair of this committee. I won't hide the fact that for me, there are some disappointments in where the conversations came out. I know there's a politically very charged season. I'm sure that didn't help. The heart of the guidelines in this particular year is in this Exhibit 1 that's before us. In prior years, generally speaking, we dealt with an Exhibit 1 like this and indicated that it wasn't pretending to be a budget. It was just a projection of what an upcoming year's budget would look like, assuming level services, but adding in some factors, particularly wage agreements entered into with the labor unions and the like, what a projection would look like in the upcoming year. This is expressed as being a little more than a projection. It's really laid out a bit more to the departments as being a parameter of the rigor that they're likely to be seeing in February. So it's been a little more emphatic this year than in prior years. And because of that, I feel like I need to comment on about 6 specific figures in this, which I'm have been reluctant to support. I will vote to support this in the end as a matter of cooperation with my colleagues, but I want to be sure that I comment on where these are. There were not many accommodations made to the issues that we as a caucus were raising. One where there was relates to the capital items, as Roland has pointed to. The total capital projects in the first draft were at 40 million, and they've been increased to 55 million. That's a lot less, I guess, than the 73 million that the Budget Committee was settling on the last February and March, but then COVID hit, reducing the total capital projects to 38 million and change. Another change, coordinating change with it, was the capital tax levy became 51 million higher, better than the 45 million where it started. And I do thank my colleagues for those accommodations. But let me discuss the 6 areas where I still have a problem. I do note that the text of the guidelines has a nod to these concerns, saying that there are issues on some of these items, and we'll be discussing them more fully in February when the real budget, proposed budget, recommended budget gets structured by this Budget Committee. The first of these relate in no particular sequence. The first of these relates to the school lunch fund, what the schools call food services, but we at the BET call that the school lunch fund. I serve as a liaison there. Being a liaison there has given me an opportunity to have discussions about this with Assistant Superintendent Carabillo, David Nanarello, who is the heads that department, and Sean O'Keefe, who of course is the Chief Financial Officer for schools. And I want to be sure that I point out that although the guidelines talks about finishing fiscal year 21 with a negative fund balance of 520,000, Roland, perhaps you can locate that and highlight it or whatever. Yep, perfect. Thank you. 520,000. Please know that from my dialogue with them, most particularly Mr. O'Keefe, they're presently of the opinion that they'll be finishing the current year, fiscal year 21, with a negative fund balance in this item of more than $1 million, but less than $1.5 million, somewhere in that range. It's very early in the year. It's very hard for them to be precise about it. It's COVID, of course, that's causing the problem. That I've got tons of kids. I can't remember what the figure was, but something like about 20% of the kids are doing remote learning in the elementary and middle school levels. I'm not sure if I have that percentage right. And at the high school, even worse, where we have about 1/3 of our public school students, they're cohorting, so that quite apart from whatever is the percentage that are doing remote learning, again, that might be perhaps 20%, the remaining group are divided in half, and 2 are attending just Mondays and Tuesdays, and the other half on just Thursdays and Fridays. You can imagine what that does to the revenues at school lunch. So the first point is that I think the 520 is unduly optimistic, and I think would have to be at least twice that amount, maybe more. Secondly, still on school lunch, on the subsidy, the guidelines show that would be paying into school lunch a subsidy of $150,000. Roland, it's the preceding line if you want to highlight that. School lunch ran at a loss in fiscal year 19 of about $240,000, about $90,000 more than the 150. In fiscal year 20, it was running better, and then COVID hit. I don't know the final figures, but you can imagine that if they were incurring costs and sending out remote meals to the free and reduced lunch kids from March through the end of June, you can imagine that those figures became quite disastrous. I asked Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Nanarello and Ms. Carabillo, Dr. Carabillo, what they thought was going to be the anticipated need as a subsidy in fiscal year 22. And their figure was 250,000, not 150,000. We budgeted 220,000, I think, for fiscal year 21. If I had to make a recommendation, I probably would have budgeted here instead of the 150, 220. So I think, again, we're dealing with a number which is inappropriately optimistic. Thirdly, on the subsidy to Nathaniel Witherell, we're in guidelines to be paying a subsidy to them of $1.5 million. This is a little harder for me to speak to because there's so much here that's unknown, but we did project for fiscal year 21, before we knew about COVID, that they would be operating at a loss of about $3.1 million. In fiscal year 19, we had $6.6 million, but some of that was actually a misassignment of some of the debt for various reasons I won't go into from the prior year. But even in the prior year, we had a $2.9 million loss. And by the way, in fiscal year 17, we had a $3.1 million loss. I just feel like the $1.5 million is actually an unlikely figure. For fiscal year 20, COVID actually had a very serious impact on operations there. Some of it was serendipitous, meaning that, in fact, some of the figures, together with some assistance that the facility was receiving from state and federal government, was running better. We also have enjoyed some terrific changes in the installation of prudent management there, and they're making quite a bit of difference too. It's really hard for me to understand exactly where the year is going to end up, where this facility is going to end up in fiscal year 21. We're budgeting fiscal year 22 as if it's a non-COVID related, subsidized by the state and federal government, meaning CARES Act type of funding and the like. I would have, if it was left to me, I said to you that I think projecting a subsidy at 2.7 million, a figure that we used for 2 or 3 prior years, would be more realistic. Number 4, special education out of district placement tuitions and settlements. We've had this conversation a number of times. The figures include a 1.6 figure. Roland, do you want to scroll up to where that appears in the 200s under schools? You see the large step up there and the higher percentage. What that is the normal items in the 200s, plus the addition of more or less one-time appropriation of $1.6 million to be applied towards these out-of-district settlements. Well, we may be applying 1.6 here, but the school boards keep saying to us emphatically that no, they were not expecting it to be 1.6. They're expecting it to be 1.9. And it doesn't quite make sense to me why why I'm not taking the advice and instruction we requested from the school board at the figures that they propose. In the same vein, for my 5th point on schools operating, back in September 5th, we talked about the question of, in the COVID times, it's very hard for us to get a clear vision of what's going to be happening in the upcoming year, especially since we don't know what's happening in COVID. As a consequence of that, we decided, I was proposing that we actually hold meetings, conferences, but it was proposed that we propound questions. And Ms. Hess and myself prepared these questions and we sent them out. It was approved by this committee. As to schools particularly, we received very detailed, lengthy, thoughtful responses after careful research by Mr. O'Keefe, the Chief Financial Officer. We received those on the 7th of October. What we're doing here simply ignores the answers that we were given. We talked about how useful was the information, and then we put it aside and didn't incorporate it into our figures at all. He listed out for us 16 items which were cuts from fiscal year 21. They totaled $1,250,000 and change. It included such things as a complete termination of the purchase of library books, $138,000. Cutting $60,000 from special ed, who would do that under the present circumstances, and a number of other jolting cuts. And Mr. O'Keefe told us in his responses to our questions that of that $1.25 million, there's $673,000, which are deep cuts that cannot be repeated without making profound changes in how the schools operate. I don't think there's anybody who wanted to make changes at that level. In addition, he also had given us a list of $1,818,000 and change of expenses in fiscal year 21 that have actually been paid by taking, with permission from the BET, unspent funds from fiscal 20 and applying them to pre-purchase items and reduce our operating costs in fiscal year 21. Those extra funds were there because of COVID, the cancellation or suspension of the school bus contract, substitute teachers. I can't remember what some of the other items were, supplies, utilities, and the like, a number of smaller items that aggregated a savings in this size. But what we've done now is we've projected the operating costs for fiscal year 22 based upon the numbers appropriated for fiscal year 21. And we've done that without adding back in the artificial reduction of the fiscal year 22 figures for these items that were prepaid out of fiscal 20 dollars into fiscal year 21 to create the model from which we were projecting fiscal year 22. If I add back the $673,000 of cuts that Mr. O'Keefe says can't be repeated, together with the 1.8 and change of prepayments that were artificially paid in fiscal year 21 out of fiscal year 20 dollars, they total $2,491,000 and change. If I increase that by 2%, which is what we seem to be doing in this model, it means that there's a little over $2.5 million of operating expense of schools in fiscal year 22 that has not been accounted for. And even though we received these advices and the detailed backup from Mr. O'Keefe, we didn't change our figures. We left our figures to be artificially cheap by $2.5 million. And I think that's a mistake. Lastly, I continue to be troubled by the $3 million being pulled from capital non-recurring. Roland, do you want to scroll down and highlight that item down in the funding line? This is a line where we're taking sums, in a sense, out of fund balance. This is not unrestricted fund balance. This is fund balance that's restricted for capital and non-recurring costs, just like we have also a risk fund. And the thought is that these are available funds that we seem not to be needing. Pete, when I'm done, can tell me what the correct figure is, but I believe our balance in capital non-recurring right now is a number over $9 million or something, as I recall, and I may not have that correctly. And I accept the idea that our controller may say to us, we're not going to need that much money. We're carrying more money than we need. What I do have a problem with is using that as like it was fund balance to reduce mill rate. I looked at a statute. The statute citation is 7-364, which is Connecticut statute that governs how one may use unused funds in a capital non-recurring reserve account. And as I read the statute, I want to be in a position of giving legal advice to the town. In February, if we're still talking about doing this, we can get advice from counsel who really know what they're talking about instead of my faking it here. But as I read that, you can only draw funds out of capital non-recurring if you apply them against a specific identified capital project, not just for capital projects generally, not just to reduce mill rate generally, but you have to allocate it. If you're going to do that at all, you have to allocate it to a specific identified capital project, which is not what's happening here. And so I think this actually violates statute. And we don't need to do it at all. That's really what's troubling me. If you wanted to, you could leave all these figures that you're seeing in front of you and simply move that $3 million as being a draw against additional unrestricted fund balance, like the 15 million and the 1,520,000 in the two lines above it. I don't think you need to do that either. As I look at this, and these are just guidelines, they don't have a lot of the underlying detail. But I can see from the work that we have here, and Roland, if you would scroll up to fixed charges, one of the lower lines in fixed charges, if you take a look at fixed charges, the second line from the bottom, in last year, we were allocating 23 million, not quite 300,000 to other items in fixed charges. And our contribution into capital non-recurring, our annual contribution, lies there. In the new year, it's about the same number. It's 23 million, it's almost 800,000. It's a little bit more, but not demonstrably more. Buried in that number is our contribution to the Capital Z Fund, which, as I understand it, is what we call capital and non-recurring. And in last year's figure, the component of that was about a little over $4 million. So since this total line for other fixed charges is about the same, I assume what's implicit in that is an expectation that we would be applying about $4 million into capital non-recurring. If you want if you think we're carrying too much in capital non-recurring and want to reduce it by $3 million, to my mind, the solution there is to reduce our contribution from $4 million to $1 million, contribute $3 million less. That will do exactly what my colleagues are looking to do, and that's to reduce mill rate. It will have that result at the bottom. And it won't have this troublesome feature of whether or not we're properly drawing against capital non-recurring. What we're going to do is reduce the amount that we contribute into capital non-recurring. If that's still not satisfactory, then if the objective here was to use fund balance to reduce mill rate, I would rather have done that not in the capital recurring line, but in funds that we drew from unrestricted fund balance. Those are my comments of the 6 areas in which I think the figures before us simply are not an accurate depiction of what should be a projection of our budget. I do appreciate that the text portion of the guidelines do give a nod to that there are some issues out there that need to be discussed in February. We're not casting a budget here. These are just guidelines. And I don't think these numbers that I'm talking about are going to make it difficult for our departments and for the school board to structure its budget. But I feel like it artificially understates our actual anticipations for budget. And I think when I use the word deceptive, it is deceptive, but I don't think in a venal way, but I think it confuses or misadvises our public. And I think that that's a mistake. And so I'm troubled by these figures, and I look forward to discussing them in February. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raymer. I appreciate your thoughtful remarks and the details you put, with the remarks. I believe, and and we all know that the Budget Committee will learn substantially more between now and February. And I think we all expect very detailed, and constructive discussions at that point in time. We certainly had these kind of discussions this past February. But this upcoming February, we have more unknowns in the interim, so I look forward to those discussions. Do we have any other comments? I see Mr. Mason's hand up, but I would like to give Ms. Moriarty and Mr. Deuce an opportunity to speak, prior to asking our other BET members, and I will be certainly calling on the BET members, afterwards. Ms. Moriarty, do you have anything that you would like to say at this point?
Yes, I do have some comments to add.
And may I ask you, please, do you want to have the screen up, or would you rather have the screen down during your discussions?
I don't think I need the screen up, so we can bring it down if that's
Thank
helpful.
you, Mr. Geiger.
Look, I share some of the same concerns or many of the same concerns that Jeff has just indicated. I want to take a step back, though, and talk about what these guidelines are intending to do. They're meant to give guidance to the Board of Education and the town departments as they're preparing their budgets, and to identify the issues that we are seeking more information about and we'll be discussing further in February when we really have the in-depth conversations about the budget. It also, though, does identify our expectations that our departments and the Board of Ed are using when they prepare their budget. So I think they need to read the text carefully as well, and not just this chart. This chart, I do share Mr. Raymer's concern that the name of the chart, estimate budget, seems to convey that it's what we would approve today if we didn't know anything else. And I don't think that that's really a fair depiction. It's kind of it includes some information we know today and excludes other information we know today, but it's the guidance. And I do want to acknowledge that the first draft we got, which was primarily written by Ms. Tarkington, did, for the first time in a long time, fund or recognize the need to fund the labor settlements. And that's true for the Board of Ed and the town. And so that does push the numbers up. The Board of Ed settlements for the GEA contract are higher than for most of the other bargaining units. But that is reflected and funded in these guidelines. And then the typical 2% that we put in here for almost everything else is the starting point of the discussions that we're going to have in February. Look, we know that there are challenges. The schools have been very public about their concern about the fiscal 21 base and using that as the base. It's missing some numbers. There's certainly a lot of uncertainty about special education. Not only is it this particular line item of out-of-district tuition that is a discussion item, but there is a study going on now about the way the district is meeting the needs of those students, and there's some potential outcome of there will be recommendations, and nobody knows what the budgetary impact of those recommendations will be and how the school will adjust those. So that's an open item. It's referenced in the text. We'll talk more in February about it. They may not be completed with their work, but we'll see where they are at that time. I would imagine, and I think I know the Department of Human Services is under increasing pressure this year as the impacts of the economy hit some of our more vulnerable residents. And I think there's a lot of information that we need to learn about what the needs are there. Our capital models and expectations are really in disarray. We upended things last year when we made some last minute changes to what we were funding. There are still the same outstanding questions we always have about how much can we accomplish, what's outstanding, what are the real priorities. And these guidelines do ask for a process that sets the priorities for the town and the Board of Education so that we as a BET know what we have to fund and when, and identify what we're able to fund. So some of those text changes or comments in the text really will help us in February. And I would hope that the departments do look at that, and maybe we can give them some more detailed guidance over expectations before our February meetings. Look, these guidelines are a compromise document. I think they're trying to reflect our varied points of view about what needs to be in them and what doesn't need to be in them at this point in time. At this point, I'm prepared to vote in favor of these guidelines, recognizing some of the challenges that we know exist out there in the departments. Look, we're trying to balance the right level of services at the right level of cost for our residents. And it's a challenge that we face every year. I think we want to set ourselves up for success in February by getting the necessary information that we'll need at that time to set it up, to make those decisions. So with that, as I said, I'm prepared to support these guidelines now. They reflect a little bit more of a balance that I think that Jeff and I were looking for. And hopefully the departments then have the necessary guides to give us the information we need in February.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Mr. Deuce, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Yes, I do. I'm relatively late to the game here, but I must say I've been impressed by the good work and effort put forward by my three colleagues and by Deborah in getting us to this stage in this document. I understand the concerns that Mr. Raymer expressed about where there might be some issues that this document doesn't fully reflect, and that we'll have to address in February. There's a lot happening, a lot of moving pieces. I think the document that's been prepared, though, is a remarkable document. And it does, as Ms. Moriarty suggested, does represent some compromise on the part of the various members of the committee. I would also, as Ms. Moriarty, support approving this document when we get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deuce. So I know that Mr. Mason has had his hand up. Let me see where we are here and bring up Mr. Mason. So I am looking here. Mr. Mason, are you there? Wait a second. Mr. Mason, can you talk? Can you turn on your microphone, please?
So,
And, well, what I am, so far,
you should be able to hear me.
We hear you,
think-
Mike.
Okay, just first of all, before guidelines, I'll be looking to the BET if the budget committee does approve a set of guidelines with the exhibits, and I'm looking for feedback actually. I think what we will need to do, and I'm sort of really looking for help. I think we'll need to post that as approved by the budget committee. The document does have to go to the BET. There's no doubt about that. And our goal is to do that in October. I'm trying not to call for a special meeting unless I was hoping that maybe Matrix would be ready for a presentation, but there's a slight delay on that. Maybe we could have done two things there. So I will look for feedback. Send me an email what you think we should do. If guidelines make it out of the budget committee, I'm all ears. Just send me that. I just wanted to touch on a few things. Guidelines are different this year. There's no doubt the guidelines this year talk about what we know today versus what we will talk about in February. I think that's a change. I think I just want to touch on Mr. Raymer's Connecticut General Statutes. I don't like to let anybody think that we're going down the road. The Capital Project Fund, the Z Fund, is in the general fund. The capital non-recurring is a standalone fund. It can only receive money three ways: surplus, tax levy, or appropriation during the budget. What I think we're trying to depict here is that a certain number of projects will be funded directly from that fund. As when we go to market, we have to specifically say what we're borrowing for. Peter has to do that annually. Well, I think when we get to February, the challenge you have to stay with this consistent thought is to pick specific projects that you would like to pay for out of capital non-recurring. Highway blacktopping, for instance, whatever that number is annually, it's say 3 million. You could specifically say, we're going to do that out of capital non-recurring, put a project number to that and fund it accordingly. That's how you'll stay in compliance. But I just don't want anybody to hear words about not being in compliance with statutes, because that's no one's intentions here. And I think I wish everybody had paid attention to capital non-recurring for the last 15 years, like some of us have. I see Mr. Raymer laughing. So I just wanted to clear that up. But I think what I think you, as a BET, there's a lot of things that we need to talk about, not only what the services are, but what the accountability is, things that we've asked for years. I think also the BET's got a newer challenge in the fact that looking forward, what the differences are going to be for these departments. I am so sympathetic to what the Board of Ed's going to have to deal with going forward and changes in education. I'm not talking about just next year. I'm talking about over a period of years. There's going to be changes there. They're under quote new management, and they're refining their what they're looking at to it, and I'm sure they'll be more than anxious to talk to us in February. But I hope if guidelines pass, I think we need to decide how we want to do that. If we want to wait till November, I would think that most departments realize that if guidelines pass our budget committee, unless I get feedback from other BET members that they're against them, I would think that would be a message in the community, but I look forward to feedback. So everybody send me an email and tell me your thoughts.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your comments. I don't see any other hands raised, so shall I ask for a vote on the budget guidelines, please? Those in favor?
You do this as a roll call, Madam Chair?
I see, yes. Andy, since you've spoken up, I've seen.
Okay, I vote yes.
And Mr. Deuce votes yes. Mr. Raymer, I see your hand raised.
And I vote yes. Now, my hand was raised to indicate I was voting yes.
And Ms. Moriarty?
Yes, I vote yes.
And I, Leslie Tarkington, also vote yes. So the budget guidelines have passed. 400. I'd just like to make a couple of brief comments here that the Budget Committee recognizes that these budget guidelines are being prepared with many future unknowns for fiscal 22, including whether the COVID-19 pandemic will be continuing, not returning, or a blend of both. The BET will use the budget hearings and the information requested in the guidelines to identify modifications to the current estimate budget, endeavoring to find balance between services and their costs. The Budget Committee looks forward to learn from the town and BOE schools about their visions for operating in fiscal 22. And I want to thank Ms. Moriarty for all her work, Mr. Raymer, Mr. Deuce, and again, Ms. Hess. I also want to thank Jenny Larkin and Horst Tebby, who support us with Zoom and GCTV respectively. The next BET Budget Committee meeting is scheduled for Monday, November 9th at 10:30 a.m. So thank you. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Leslie?
Second.
Yes, Roland, let's come back. Roland has something before we adjourn.
Do you want these approved budgets now posted on the website?
Yes,
Yeah.
those should be posted on the website. And I
Okay.
guess what we do is we now take off the words draft and we remove from the footer the notation that it's a draft.
Okay.
It's dated the 27th, so the date is accurate. And I think there are changes to Exhibit 2 that Ms. Moriarty requested.
Right. Okay.
Can I
Is
ask
that-
one clarification? They should be posted clearly as an item for today's Budget Committee agenda, but, and maybe Mike's still on the call. Do we also want to see them posted under the budget page on the website? They have not yet been approved by the full BET. These say from the BET. It doesn't say from the BET Budget Committee. Typically, we wait until the full BET acts before posting it in that location, but I'm not sure the public are going to find these guidelines under today's special meeting agenda.
Ms. Moriarty, are you suggesting that we just modify them ever so slightly, such that it says it's from the Budget Committee, and post them that way until they're approved by the full BET? So we could say Board of Estimate and Taxation Budget Committee in the from section. Are you suggesting that?
I think that would be clearer if these are going to be the document going forward. Mr. Mason hasn't yet identified that the BET is going to act very quickly on these. I would support a special meeting from the BET so that our departments and Board of Ed have clear guidance from the full body. But I don't want that much time to go by without giving access to that. And I think Mike has just popped up again. He's ready to respond, or no?
Mike,
I'm all ears. You know, obviously, if we do a special meeting, I assume the package is going to be the package you had, because you didn't make any changes, so that's good.
Well, I know it's not the package that's been posted for this meeting. It's the revised draft, which only really includes the revised pension number. There's nothing substantive that was changed in the rest of the document, and the public should understand that. But today's document is different than was posted on Friday.
Okay, so when you get that back together, I mean, today is Tuesday. I like to, if that's what the will is of the BET, I appreciate it, but I really want to canvass everybody a little bit first and give them the opportunity to, opine on that. I think that's, it's not our regular scheduled meeting, it's a special meeting, so I'm a little bit sensitive to that.
so
Can I pick here for just a second? I'd rather not now take the document and put the Budget Committee in the to and in the from and the BET in the to. You're starting to amend the document again. I would rather just put a legend in front of it or at the top of it that says draft approved by the Budget Committee and recommended to the full BET. I think, and then leave the rest of the document read the way it is. The document itself will probably be redated at the full BET, because right now it's dated I don't know if it's the 23rd or the 27th or what date.
26th.
The 26th, but the BET will speak on whatever date it is that they vote, and the date would have to be changed. I think you'd want that date changed at that point. But for right now, I would just prefer to leave the document exactly as we voted it. Don't make any change in the face of it, and put something in front of it or at the top of it that says this is the draft guidelines approved by the Budget Committee and recommended to the full BET.
Thank you, Mr. Raymer. Mr. Mason, is that appropriate for you? And we'll just post that in the budget section as Ms. Moriarty suggested, and then you'll set up the meeting and we'll take the next steps.
Yes, I think most of us are on the meeting. I'm looking at the attendees and the panelists, so we'll get some feedback and do this and set it up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And-
Congratulations.
And thank you. So I think we have a motion on the table to adjourn.
Sure. Aye.
And it's been seconded. So, yeah, Andy says yes.
Yes.
And I'm a yes too. So the meeting is now adjourned at 10:15, and I thank you all for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.